It is my great privilege to introduce the man of the cross, Reverend Bill Cruz, to you all this morning. Bill was born in England and migrated to Australia at a very young age. In the 1970s, he left a promising and lucrative career in electrical engineering and microelectric research behind to join the ministry of the Wayside Chapel in King's Cross. Bill worked with people struggling with alcohol and drug addictions, and really anyone who's facing any sort of struggle. He's led crisis centers, has helped reunite adoptees and birth parents, established programs to prevent child abuse and help children and youth living on the streets of Sydney. It would take too long to list all the programs and ministries Bill has been involved in. To summarize, if you are in genuine need of help or love, chances are Bill Cruz wants to be there for you. Bill is an ordained minister of the Uniting Church of Australia. He celebrated his 80th birthday just last year and is our first Spirited Australian guest of 2025. Please welcome Bill Cruz. It sounds like you don't actually need a microphone. That's okay.
No, I don't really.
Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you. Oh, I'm grateful to be invited.
Yeah, we're grateful to have you. Spirited Australians is an event where we invite guests from all sorts of backgrounds, people with interesting stories to tell. It is also a Christian event, a church event that is sort of part of our regular Sunday service. And so my first question is always the same to all our Spirited Australians guests, and it usually takes us right deep into sort of the muck of things. How do you personally relate to God, to Christianity, to Jesus of Nazareth? What does all of that mean to you?
Oh, that takes a while. When I was a pretty normal doing research engineering, I actually got paid a salary to go to university, believe it or not, and really loved studying single crystal silicon, all that stuff. But through a whole series of events, ended up one day in King's Cross, and there were all of these kids, and there'd been... You see, during World War II, a lot of women gave birth to children out of wedlock, and they ended up in orphanages when the husbands came home. There were lots of them. And these kids ended up in orphanages. And in those orphanages, doesn't matter whether they were Methodist, Catholic, whatever, state, government, whatever, they were all, not all, heaps of them were terribly sexually abused. If anything, Christianity's on the nose because of the sexual abuse scandals that are still being found. And it was just such a shock, because these kids would be telling me their stories, and they're 10 and 11 and God knows what else. And anyway, so I found myself doing research engineering during the day and up at the cross at night, you know. And while I was doing that, I was running lots of programs in the cross. And one night I was going up to the chapel because there were all these things going on. And I was walking up the stairs to the landing, to the coffee shop to run it. And I got to the landing and time stood still. Just, and it must have been a millisecond, but it seemed forever. And there was like a voice, but there wasn't. It was a knowing. And it said, you've got to leave your job. You've got to come and work here. You've got to work with the poorest of the poor. The work will be long and hard and arduous, but don't worry about that. You'll become well known, but don't worry about that. Oh, and by the way, your personal life won't be that happy. And I knew it was true, and I knew it came from outside of me and within me at the same time. Because if it was just me, it'd be, oh, and everything will be rosy, you know? I knew, and that was, so I had to go to AWA and resign, and they got really pissed off, to tell you the truth. And I had to leave, and I went and saw Ted Noss, the minister, and I said, I've got to come and work for you. And he said, what's the least amount of money I can pay you? And there was a commune starting in the Cross for $10 a week at that time. So I said $11 a week. So I started working for him for $11 a week. And I've been trying to make sense of that experience all my life. And a whole lot of things have happened, but I do a lot of meditating, and I try and meditate for an hour every day. And I do the Buddhist meditation, which is the breathing and the being in the now and all of that. And it's interesting because every now and then, getting into the now and breathing and being still and all of that, and people comment on this, there's a warm, loving glow that's part of you and not. And I realised that's where that voice came from. And that experience has led me to so many of the experiences of Jesus written in the Bible. So many of them. So that all of a sudden you get transported from then to now. And what I was just thinking on this the other day, that the Sermon on the Mount, like, what a beautiful mind to create that. Like, I don't mean it happened like that. I mean, the series of sayings that were collected together just leaves you in awe of what's beyond that. And then I realised, I'm going funny here, then I realised my kingdom is not of this world, you know. Most of us think of up there. But actually, it can be seen as a new way of seeing down here. If we lived that way, this is the way the world would be now. Not up there in the future, but now, you know. So I just get carried away with all of this sort of stuff, you know.
Thank you. You already mentioned the chapel and the cross.
Yeah.
When you sort of started out there in the 70s, what did the cross look like? Maybe you can sort of describe that to us a little bit.
King's Cross and the Gold Coast were the place most runaway kids headed for. There were a lot of, when I started, the heroin problem was just starting because they were smuggling all the marijuana up from around Griffith into the markets, and that was going out. And then those people met with some of the Chinese triads in Hong Kong, and that gradually brought all the heroin into Australia. But it was also brought in by American servicemen and all that sort of stuff. And King's Cross was a hotbed of goodness and badness. Hotbed. And I remember one of the things Ted said, which is always true, if you want to find God, you go to the hells of the world, because that's where God is. And if God's anywhere at the moment, God's in Gaza. That's where God is. If you want to go and find God, that's where you go. And that's what I found. That's what I found. Yeah. There were lots of returned servicemen suffering PTSD. There was all the anti-war. Every person in the cross wanted to be Bob Dylan. So there were guitars everywhere. It was. They don't realise that Woolloomooloo had the biggest hippie colony outside of San Francisco in the world. It was a whole mixture of everything. And I miss it. I miss that time with all my heart. And I feel so many of the people that were in that time betrayed us in the end by becoming aspirational voters, if you know what I mean.
Obviously, the cross has changed quite a
Yeah.
lot over the years. Do you think that as the cross changed, things got actually better, or was sort of the darkness and the challenge just sort of distributed into other places in Sydney and elsewhere?
The best way I can describe it is when I went to theological college, and there's a whole lot of stuff. But I went and saw the Goodley Burgers of Ashfield, and they said, "Oh, you won't find any problems here like you found in King's Cross," and they were all there. They were all there. I went out with the ambulance, and the first thing I saw with the ambulance was a guy had bashed his wife with a golf club in the middle of the night, and there was. They had, in the middle of Ashfield, they had the biggest gambling den, because it was all illegal then, in Australia, the biggest gambling den. And they were all, and I'd be wandering around at night, and there was this, I went into this place, and there's all these people, and there's all this money, mountains of money on the tables, and they're all gambling away and all of that, you know. And the guy, I'm still friends with the guy who was running it all. and he says, "Hello," and I go, "Hello." And he says, "What are you doing? Are you a reverend?" I go, "Yeah." Oh. And I'm trying to make friends in those days, And he goes, "Oh, do you gamble, Rev?" I go, "No." "What do you think about gambling?" And I muttered something. And then I tried to be friendly and said, "But my son's 13, and the other day he tried to get me to put money on a horse in the Melbourne Cup." And he looked at me and he folded his cards up and he said, "That's dreadful. Any child of mine who was going to be gambling, I'd be given..." And he's got all this money, you know, on the table. And it's just so hypocritical, but we like that, you know. The cross was an example of the darkness that's in society anywhere, you know.
An example of the darkness that is in society always, or that's inside of each of
Inside
us?
of each of us.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a dark side of us that we don't want to look at. We just don't want to look at. I'm a great fan of 12-step programs, if you know the AA and NA and GA and all of those. And they talk about totally, when your secrets become a story, they lose their power over you. And most of us have got so many things that we believe are secrets, they paralyse us. And we don't know that it's obvious to everybody anyway, but we all play the game, you know. So that the thing I found in finding God, you need to peel away all those layers that are in yourself. Peel it away. Like Jesus said to the rich young man, or whoever he was, you have to give up that which is most precious to you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You, in the 1980s, you sort of transitioned from working at the in the cross to Ashfield, as you already mentioned. You went and studied theology.
I went to, yeah.
How did that sort of come together? Like, because I think a lot of people today who end up in ministry, they do it the other way around, where they go and study first and then they go and work in ministry. But you seem to have sort of been exposed to the Wayside Chapel and other things, and then found your way to...
Ministry is not a job, it's a mission. Yeah. And people forget that. And one of the things I worry about is how so many church organisations try to make their ministers like bureaucrats. And they're not. They're not. And I was... my time at the chapel was coming... I realised it was coming to an end, and I was scratching around, and one of the people said, "Oh, at the Uniting Church Theological College, they pay their students." And I thought, oh, that's the one I'm going to, because I didn't have any money, And they took me in, and people were saying to me, oh, it'll squash you down, And it really opened me up.
Yeah.
It was a good liberal theological, college. So it opened me up, and I'm still friends with a lot of the lecturers who are still alive. And then I was finishing early in the year because I'd got some exemptions, and I said, what am I going to do for the next 6 months? They said, go on the dole. I said, I don't want to do that. So I went and saw the moderator of the church and said, where can you send me? And he said, do you want something easy or hard? And I said, well, hard. And they said, there's troubles at Ashfield. So I just went there. And it was funny, it just opened up like that voice said, So I just went there, bang. And for a couple of years I had 10 old ladies, 10 lovely old ladies who all wore hats to church and called one another Miss. And they believed they were non-political, which meant the Liberal Party held all its meetings there, all of that sort of stuff. And I kept saying, you don't know what you're getting. And they said, that's all right. And they became like my aunts, and we did all that together. And we had all the homeless kids sleeping in the church, and they'd bring them morning tea, which would be little cucumber sandwiches. And honestly, and the kids painted the ceiling as a gift to the old. A lot of them had died. A lot of the kids died. So anyway, I just went there, and it just happened. One day the best way I can describe it is the first Christmas. I was saying, well, what are we going to do for Christmas? And they said, oh, we all go with our families. Everybody does that. I said, no, there's a lot of people who don't have anywhere to go. They couldn't believe me. Everybody's got their families, everybody. So anyway, one of the ladies gave me 2 plates of sandwiches, and so I sat in the hall on Christmas Day, and 2 people came in, and we sat and ate the sandwiches and all that. The next year, 13 people turned up, and we thought, oh, we've hit something here. We have to go out and buy barbecued chickens and God knows what else. And we thought, we're onto something. The next year we got 11, and we thought, oh, we're dying. And the next year we got 400, and then it just went off. And also I was doing a lot with drug and alcohol addicted young people, and we set up a group for parents of kids who had died, because in those days more kids were dying from drug overdoses than car smashes, which they are now. And that ultimately became family drug support, and it just happens. Things happen to happen.
Is that when sort of the Exodus Foundation began?
Oh, the Exodus Foundation began because basically I was taking in all these kids, and I knew I had to protect myself from the church authorities. So the only way I could do that was to have a really big profile. So I did a lot of media stuff, and with all the homeless kids and all that, because it really annoyed the church that I was doing that, and not the congregation, but the bureaucrats. And I got a letter from a little old lady, and in the letter, this is 30 odd years ago, it was a cheque for $10,000. She could have come from here, and she said, you're not to ring me, you're not to write to me, you have no contact with me at all, because when my family find out, they're going to be bloody angry with me. And I thought, that's when I set it up, because I thought, we've got to go legit, you see. And then Singo turned up a couple of weeks later, and he'd won all this money on the horses. And he said, what would you do if I gave it to you? I said, I'll open a soup kitchen. Because we'd got this guy who'd just come out of jail who was a really good cook, and people were starting to turn up. So we opened the next day with cooking and all of that. We had 80 people, and we've never had less. Nowadays we do 500,000 meals a year. Just happens. But, and people come to me all the time and say, I want to do just what you do. And I say, it's long and it's hard and it's endless and it's lonely. It is really lonely. And most of them fall away. They're quite happy to say all the words and do all the stuff and, say all the right stuff. But when it comes to actually putting your body where your mouth is, and that's what I think Jesus talked about a lot, that you've got to be there.
All your sort of ministries and all the things that you do now, they all sort of come under the umbrella of the Bill Cruz Foundation and the Bill Cruz Trust. Yeah. And obviously you've been working with some of these organizations, some of these people for decades now. What were some of the most impactful stories that you've experienced with your time in ministry with this foundation?
The stories of Jesus come back and haunt me all the time. We do stuff in England, and other places. And I had one day left in England. I had nothing to do. So I thought I'd go to Calais, because most of you know in France, that's where all the refugees go to try to get to England. And there was a huge encampment of 15,000 of these people all in Calais. And refugee camps are horrible. And so I went there, and I'm conflating a few things. I went there and you just sit. You go and you sit. People come up and talk to you and you learn all these things. And I saw a sign which said NA meeting, which is Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And I thought, I'll go to that. Not that I'm an addict, but I'll go to that to see how they do it here, because we run all these meetings in our church. And there was a bit of carpet like that with wood and plastic and tin and awful. And the snow and everything. And sitting on that, or standing or whatever, were maybe 10 people, men and women, and they were all nationalities and all colours. So you had black people, you had yellow people, you had all the racist groups you could think of. Some from Africa, some from the Middle East, some from all over the place. All in a circle, telling their story as you do in the NA tradition. And it was all being translated into French, kind of. And each person told their story. And the interesting thing was, I couldn't understand a word they were saying, but it was all written on their faces, And I realised the language of misery and the language of love are all one language. And it's just like they said in Acts, that you don't have to know the language to know what they're saying, And it gets to me. And I think, what am I going to say? I'm not an addict and I'm just here to watch. But at the time, my marriage was collapsing, because as that voice said, your personal life won't be that happy. And I was feeling really bad at that time. And so I got up and I said, I'm Bill from Australia. And they go, English. I said, oh no, I can't get you to England, although most of them are there now. And then it all poured out, and I said, I'm Bill from Australia, I said, and I've had 2 stuffed marriages, I said, and my kids have suffered, I said, and I feel really bad about all of that. And they all got up, all of these people got up and hugged me, all of them. And in a way, they gave me my life back, They gave me my life back. And it was an awesome moment. And they were drug addicts, they were refugees, they were Muslims, they were like the bottom of the barrel. and they had the power to give me my life back. And that's what Jesus talks about all the time. Don't trust the rich people. Don't trust the middle class. Don't trust this. Don't trust that. It's the poor, the poor, the poor. Because they got nothing to lose by giving everything. And I thought, I have to honour that. So when I got back to England, I threw out all my clothes and only wear black in the hope people ask me why I wear black all the time. Then, that's one big moment in my life. Then, a couple of years ago, my son, Michael, who's in his 50s, one of them, he had a massive psychotic breakdown. Massive. Ended up almost paralysed, you know, catatonic in a way. And we had to take him to Concord Hospital. And I kept going to try and push for things, you know. And I realised half of the people in that hospital with Michael were guests of my foundation, and they had no one to look after them, no one. So that the very people who gave me my life back, when they were right down there, had no one, no one, no one, no one. And that's... So often I just go and sit in the restaurant with all the people and I'm just one of them, just one of them. And there's no BS, you're just there, and it's healing, it's healing. That's what I'm really talking about, that. And Jesus got it. He got it. He got it. And yet the powers that be don't like that, so they want to get rid of it. This way I can explain it.
Yeah, thank you. We've already talked a little bit about sort of your struggles with the church higher ups, or the sort of the organizational part of the bureaucracy, as you call it.
Oh yeah.
And I imagine over the past several decades, you've gotten to know a lot of different churches, a lot of ministers, a lot of sort of organizations. We, as a church, we have a ministry theme this year, which is called Being Church Today.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about what does it mean to be church in 2025. And based on your experience with churches, with Christianity, what is something that you like about what Christian churches are doing today, and what is something that you find problematic, or that, to put it bluntly, pisses you off?
For all its faults, it's still open to the message of Jesus. For all its faults, it's still open. Because we're all broken in our own way. And for all its faults, that, I think, and somewhere when you least expect it, the message really explodes like an atom bomb and things change. Like Jesus said, the poor are always with you, so that those explosions are signs of hope all the time, all the time. The world doesn't have to be as it is, you know. What annoys me is really church bureaucrats are like banking bureaucrats, are like any other bureaucrat of any other institution. They're just the same. They all know one another. They're all corrupt in a way, but we're all corrupt. But and they try to protect the institution at all costs, even to the death of the institution. So that and there was a situation I was in with the church, and I went to them and I said, what you guys are doing is morally wrong. And they said, yes, we know that, but it's not legally wrong. That's the worst side of the church.
Thank you. When you talk about sitting with people, being with people, just having lunch with people from all walks of life, it sounds like engaging with people on in a loving way and in a deep way is actually not all that difficult.
No, it's not rocket science.
What do you think keeps people from engaging with people like that?
Their possessions.
Yeah.
The more we have and the more we want to hold on to, the less we give of ourselves. People who have got nothing, who have got everything to give. But people who have got stuff want to hold on to their stuff or want to hold on to their security. Like the Buddhists have got this down to a fine art. There is no certainty in this world. No certainty. And we want to delude ourselves that there is, and there's not. And this cyclone and fires and all that. All these people who spend all their time building their dream house, you know, and they believe it's all, it just blows away. Gone. And Jesus said that over and over and over again, that you have to give it all up. Give it all up. Doesn't mean, there's a difference between using stuff and owning stuff, if you get what I mean. Stuff is there to be used, not owned. We don't own anything. We don't even own our partners. We don't. You know? So it's...
And how do we overcome that? Is it because I think
Well,
I think a lot of people.
It's the great. The Roman people used to think Christians were atheists. And the reason they thought Christians were atheists was because they didn't have a God like the Roman gods. You couldn't make a statue of the God because it's love. It doesn't exist, it's love. So that often I find the most exciting people theologically are the cosmologists, you know. I don't know if you know, we can freeze light now. We can freeze light, freeze it. There's a particle here and the particle 2 trillion light years away. One moves here, it moves there instantly. There are so many exciting that how can I put it? If you're a biologist, right, the big argument today is about what is consciousness. How are we conscious? What is it, you know? And consciousness, they're trying to find it in our neural activities in our brain. What is there that creates consciousness? But what they're coming to the thing to is that consciousness, the very consciousness itself, created evolution. So that beyond anything, I think is the light every now and then that surrounds me when I'm meditating, you know. And
so the foundation of it all is the divine.
Yeah. And if we get that bit right, we can live through the slings and arrows of life, I suppose. That's what I think, anyway. And I'd encourage you to think for yourselves. You know, don't believe all the BS the church tells you. You know, think yourself. Think yourself. People say, oh, there's one Christianity. There's not. There was not one Christianity in a few years after Jesus. There were heaps of theologies, all of that. They were all boiling away, all these different things. And Yeah, but theology is lower than the lovingness, the loving presence, if you get what I mean.
Our time is probably slowly coming to a close. The people that are here today, or the people of St. Ives in general, St. Ives is not exactly an area in the world that is bad off. Most people here are doing reasonably well. If you had one more story that you would like to share with us here this morning, considering the demographic that is present here, what would that story be?
Hospital
Yes.
into the community
Yeah.
with the prostitutes and the whole lot.
Yes.
And it was really an incredible time. It was such a bad area. I mean, gambling was out of control, everything was out of control. And all the prostitutes on all the streets, and it was just an amazing situation. And I don't think many people have any idea of what it was like.
No.
And it was, I'm completely in tune with what you say.
One of my great mates was a man called Lester Besgrove, who was really a crook. And he had a projector and reels of pornographic film. And he used to run from place to place to show them, because the police would bust him everywhere. You know. It's a strange time. It was a strange time.
With the people leading
Yeah.
groups, the whole.
Yeah.
Not many people have any memory or
No.
the same sort of experience
Yeah.
that we had. You know,
Yeah.
it was quite.
I was the chaplain to the prostitutes collective at that time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
No, that's okay.
So what was the question?
That's exactly. I think what Claire is saying, and I suspect that a lot of people are, here as well are really connecting with what you're sharing, and so we're very grateful that you're going to stick around a little bit after the service. So if any of you would like to share your personal stories or hear more stories from Bill, please go and talk to him after the service. But if you have one more story that you would like to leave us with today, something to think about. And to challenge us, what would that story be?
Oh, so many. One of my great friends, I've made some really great friends through the 12-step movement, where people, like, I'm not a member of that, but I really like that, what they do. Often I think a 12-step meeting is more a church meeting than churches in lots of ways. But there was a guy, Murray. Everybody loved Murray. Everybody loved him. And he got cancer and slowly, painfully died. Everybody loved him. And I never let anybody in our community who dies end up in a pauper's grave. So we do the funerals and all of that. And Murray had come from New Zealand. Drunken Murray was the worst human being you can imagine. Kids grew up and his wife grew up beaten and abused and God knows what else, you know. So we held his funeral and the family turned up wanting to say goodbye to an utter dreadful human being. They were on one side of the room. All the other people were crying because he was such a loving human being. And the family, it was traumatic for them. The son wouldn't come to the funeral. The son hated him so much for what he'd done, he wouldn't come to the funeral. And so it took the family quite a while to hear the lovingness of this man, you know. And afterwards, his daughter said, "Oh, thank God, thank God. We don't have to remember him in the way we do. The redemption is boundless. You can never write anybody off because you never know when the train will come and hit them and they'll change. You never know. You never know. So and probably just another quick one. A fella dropped dead at one of our food vans, and he'd been coming to our food van for years, but nobody had got any details of him, you know. So we didn't even know his name, and he just dropped dead. And after it was all, nobody knew where he came from. So I went on with Ray Hadley on the radio, and I got hundreds of phone calls from Sydney from people thinking it was their father, particularly women. Wasn't anybody from there. So I went on national radio, hundreds of phone calls again, mainly from women thinking it was their father. Wasn't. Then the police found a kind of a thumbprint from 1980 that said maybe he came from Ireland. So in an Irish national radio, hundreds of women again looking for their father, you know. In the end, we finally found him, and we found his great niece in Leeds in London, in England. The amount of, what can I say? I think every family in all its extensions has somebody like that guy that dropped dead. There's somebody on the outside, you know, and and yet the story of Murray tells us never to believe they can't change.
Thank you so much.
There's an interesting. There's a video called "The Prison Within," where in San Quentin prison in America, they got a whole group of prisoners together who had murdered someone, and they formed a group with them all, because they couldn't con each other because they'd all done terrible things, you know, terrible things. And they were all in that group. And then they introduced a woman whose husband had been murdered, who believed all murderers should be executed. And they put that person in the group with the men. And the transformation was amazing. And the men came out of it so different to when they went in. And then you think, what's the point of prison? What's the point of prison? Why should these people still be locked up when they're not that anymore? You know? Like, they're the conundrums you have to live with.
I do think we should probably really come to a close this time round. But where can we support you? Where can we find you if we want to learn more? How can we support the ministry that you do?
I've got 4 books there if anyone wants to buy a book. Mm-hmm. But also I'm on 2GB on Sunday nights from 9 to midnight. And I'm just at Ashfield. People know where I am. I've got some cards with me if anyone's interested. But yeah, I'm just around.
Well,
people need to find me, they'll find me.
Very good. We'll find you. And if you ever want to come back here, you're always welcome to join us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you.